And starting the Facebook Live. Give us just a second, folks. Sorry, these things can't happen in advance. I wish they could. It takes just a second for connectivity, no matter how fast your internet is, apparently. All righty, there we are with that. All right. So thank you all. I'm Marcy Timmerman. I'm the Executive Director of Mental Health America of Kentucky, and I am pleased to present Dr. Sheila Schuster. She is a board member with us, but she is also the Executive Director of Advocacy Action Network and the Kentucky Mental Health Coalition. So she's well regarded across the state and is, of course, an expert in all things advocacy and Kentucky politics. I will share my screen right now to let her go ahead and get started. Whoop, from the beginning would be good. Sorry about that.
You need to go back one, another one. There we go.
There we are. Oh.
All right, thank you so much, Marcy, and thanks to Mental Health America of Kentucky for having this. As you all know, mental health, the mental health community has been very involved in advocacy of all kinds for the past 38 years. That's how old the Kentucky Mental Health Coalition is. But we thought it was important, especially to focus on the elections coming up. The general election date is November 3rd, but most of the voting will happen before that, and we wanted to be sure that everybody has the tools. So we really encourage you to share any or all of this PowerPoint with your members, your constituents, with the people that you serve. As Marcy mentioned, I am a licensed psychologist and executive director of Advocacy Action Network, which includes the Kentucky Mental Health Coalition and the 874K Disabilities Coalition. Next slide, please, Marcy. So now's the time for us to get active. And again, I don't think there's anything more important than deciding who the legislators are going to be, both in Frankfort and in Washington, as we come into the upcoming sessions. We will have a lot of mental health legislation. We also will have a lot of social justice and public interest legislation. And we have a say coming up in November about excuse me, who a large number of those legislators are going to be and whether they're going to be making the kind of law that we want or whether they will not be doing that. Next slide, please. So you all probably know, because the airwaves are already full of the campaign materials, we will be voting for the US President and Vice President at the top of the ticket. And kind of next in line in terms of federal offices, one of our 2 US Senate seats in Kentucky will be on the November ballot, that of Senator Mitch McConnell, whose primary challenger is Amy McGrath, although there will be others on the ballot as well. And at least in Louisville, where I live, the airwaves have been full for months, it feels like, with the back and forth warring ads for Senator McConnell and Amy McGrath. I want to remind you that all 6 of the Kentucky seats in the Congressional House of Representatives will also be on the ballot. I think probably the most contested seat is in the 3rd district, which is Representative Andy Barr running against challenger Josh Hicks. I think that's the one that is touted to be probably the closest of all of the 6 races that are on the ballot. Next, please, Marcy. So we talk about our General Assembly, which of course is our Kentucky legislature. We know that we have 100 Kentucky House seats. 65 of those have contests and will be on the general election ballot. Where you live will determine whether you have a vote to cast for a Kentucky House seat. Those are 2-year terms, so those seats come up every even numbered year. We have 38 Kentucky Senate seats. Those are 4-year terms, and they split them in half so that half of the senators are up for re-election every 2 years. And this year it's the odd numbered districts. And 12 of those 19 seats will be on a ballot. Again, you may not have a Kentucky Senate seat to vote for depending on what Senate district you live in. Again, these are such critical elections to determine who your representative and your senator will be in the upcoming General Assembly sessions, with the session starting January 5th, 2021. So we know that voting has been changed because of the pandemic. You will remember that the primary election was moved from the May date, the usual May date, to a June date, and was held under very different circumstances. There was a lot of national attention on Kentucky and a lot of concern, primarily because there was only one in-person voting location in every county. And so in your large counties like Jefferson, which is Louisville, or Fayette, which is Lexington, there were some problems with either long lines or people not being able to get to the voting site. On the other hand, some of the good news was that people were encouraged to vote by mail, and the overwhelming majority did so. The good news there overall was that the overall turnout for that primary election, most of which was cast by absentee ballot, recorded record numbers of voters, which is really what we want. We want to have everyone get registered and everyone exercise their duty and responsibility and right to vote. So what I want to do is to go very carefully through the changes for the November 3rd general election. Again, the rules and the deadlines have been changed due to the pandemic, and you have many more options in some ways than you had at the time of the primary. Next slide, please. First of all, and just such a basic thing, but people kind of forget about it. You have to be registered in order to vote. So first of all, if you are people that you're talking with voted in the primary and you have not had any changes either in your address or in your name since then, you don't have to re-register. So we don't have to re-register before we can vote in every election. However, if anything has changed, you got married and your name changed, or you changed your name for some other reason, or your address changed, then you have to go and register again. They've made it very, very simple. The website to go to is www.govoteky.com. You can also go on there to check your registration and to make sure that everything is correct. So you can enter your full name as it appears usually on your driver's license, but the name under which you have voted in the past. They'll ask for your birth date and your social security number, and then it will pop up and tell you your Kentucky House district, your Kentucky Senate district, and your congressional district. So that's an easy way to find out what those numbers are if you don't know them. We need to be sure that we're getting the word out to be sure that people are registered or have updated their registration. 4 p.m. local time on Monday, October 5th. So roughly a month before the deadline for voting, which is November 3rd. Would also like to point out that the governor signed an executive order. I think one of his first actions when Governor Beshear, after he was sworn in, issued an executive order that allowed about 140,000 felons who had previously been denied the right to vote now are eligible to vote. And there are groups that are working on outreach to these previously convicted felons who now are eligible to vote, to make sure that they get registered. And we can put you in touch with some of those groups. A gentleman by the name of Dave Newton heads up that group. But there are a lot of, ACLU is doing it, the Urban League in Louisville, some of the organizations for people of color, since so many of our felons unfortunately are disproportionately individuals of color. So again, let's do some active outreach if you're in a position to do that, and make sure that we have everybody who's eligible is actually registered. Next, please. So we're going to have 3 different ways to vote, and you actually will get to decide what is your preferred way. I have to say, in this time of rank partisanship and rancor between Republicans and Democrats over almost every issue, it is really a breath of fresh air to see our Democratic Governor Beshear and our Republican Secretary of State Michael Adams coming together in a bipartisan agreement. They did it around the primary, and they've done it again, I think, for the November general election. You can vote by absentee ballot, and you can request your ballot now, and I'm going to go into a lot more detail about that, but the window is open to request your absentee ballot. Secondly, you can vote in person if you would like to do that, and you have a much longer time period to be able to go to a polling place in your county and cast your ballot in person. And that's October 13th to November 2nd, which is the day before the actual election day. Or you can vote in person on election day. Next slide, please, Marcy. So let's talk about absentee ballots. Again, a mailed in or dropped off ballot will be available in this election. It is slightly changed, and if you remember, for the primary, you didn't have to specify a reason why you were requesting an absentee ballot. They assumed that the COVID-19 pandemic was the reason for everyone requesting an absentee ballot. And so when you applied for that, either on the website or through your county clerk, you didn't have to give a reason. This is a little bit different for the general election, but again, very, very simple. They have the first box that you go to after you go to www.govotekentucky.com will give you a list of about 6 reasons, including being out of the county on election day, being in the hospital, being in your last trimester of pregnancy, having a mobility disability. But the very first one talks about physical issues and includes concern about contracting or spreading COVID-19. You don't have to choose one of the 5 or 6 choices that are there. You simply check the box at the bottom of the list that says, does one of these apply to you? So I think that was a concession to the Republicans in the General Assembly, who didn't want no cause or no reason absentee voting, but they have made it very easy for you to go on and request your absentee ballot. That portal opened about 2 weeks ago, August 21st, and it will close at midnight on October 9th. I believe that you're still going to be able to request an absentee ballot after that from your county clerk, so whatever county you live in. But we are really encouraging everyone who thinks that they're going to vote by absentee ballot to go on and register, put in your request. Don't hold your breath. The absentee ballots will not be sent out until mid-September. There's apparently a mechanism the State Board of Education has to go through to verify the accuracy of every ballot. And remember, every ballot is different in every voting precinct. So it takes some time to do that, and that's why there is a delay. But I would say if you're sure you want to vote by absentee ballot, go on to the govoteky.com and request your ballot. They will ask you if you want it to be sent to your home address on record, or if you want it to be sent for another to another address, which is really nice. I have a friend who's leaving next week to be in Hawaii when her daughter gives birth to a 3rd child. And so she's going to be out of the county, obviously, during that time. And she was able to put in her daughter's home address for her absentee ballot to be sent there. The other caveat is that if you request an absentee ballot, it's going to be very difficult then for you to go on and vote in person. So there's a big warning sign when you get to that website that says, do not request an absentee ballot if you plan to vote in person. And remember, in person can be either in that early voting period or actually on the day of the election. Just a reminder, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and Marcy will let me know about them, and we can stop at any point and answer any questions or find out if I need to get more information and get back to you.
One quick correction. I think you are so used to talking about education. You said the State Board of Education, but you meant elections.
Elections.
So I just want to put that on record that that's who is actually handling the ballot stuff.
Thank you very much. I was thinking E's, and I don't think about the State Board of Elections.
Exactly. We don't talk about them often. There was one question about signatures. If we know anything about how those are matched up, because the absentee ballots are often discarded because of signature issue.
Yeah, let's go to the next slide. When we talk about filling out your ballot correctly and so forth, and we can talk about that then. One of the issues, well, let's talk about filling it out and how you deposit it or so forth, and then we have another slide on how to do it correctly. Again, the absentee ballots must be postmarked no later than November 3rd and received by November 6th. As you know, there's been a lot of angst about the U.S. mail service, the U.S. Post Office, and people are feeling increasingly unsure about whether they want to trust the mail delivery. There will be designated secure drop-off boxes in each county where you can safely deposit your ballot. So it's a kind of a drive up, as I understand it, and you put your correctly filled out, it's double signed ballot into that secure box, and they are picked up every day. I think they are only going to be available 8 to 4 or something like that. We don't have those locations, and I'm not sure how the State Board of Elections is going to get those locations out to us, but we will put as much information as we have on the Advocacy Action Network webpage as we get that. Next, Marcy. Okay, so here's where we get into problems. There were literally thousands of absentee ballots that were thrown out because people did not follow the exact instructions. I have not heard that any of those or many of those were because the signatures didn't match. It was mostly because they weren't signed in both places. So if you recall going through that absentee ballot, you obviously have to follow the directions in terms of black ink or so forth to mark your choice for each federal and state. And you may have some local offices on that as well, some of the Metro Council or City Council offices. So be sure you look at your complete ballot, and there may be some on the back. So be sure that you fill out every office that you have the opportunity to vote for. You have to sign both that inner envelope and the outer envelope, and those are the two that supposedly they're looking at to match up. I don't know, with hundreds of thousands of absentee ballots coming in, how closely they match those up. My sense was in the discussion following the primary that it was more the absence of a signature on either the inner envelope or the outer envelope. There is a flap. If you remember, it's kind of an awkward balloting process when you get it. And they also put some, they put an instruction sheet in and so forth, so you don't need to mail that back, but you need to keep that flap intact. And I don't know, Marcy, are you aware of, I had heard that some organizations were actually posting a video of,
we did it, 874K.
Okay.
So 874K did, and I'll send that out with this one. It won't have the up-to-date information, but it'll have, still the visuals of what it looked like and
great
reminders.
I thought you had done that. Thank you so much. I think that would be helpful for us to send out to folks. So again, if you're sitting here listening to this and you're thinking of people in your family who have health conditions or of an age where they really shouldn't be out voting in person, and you want to be sure that their vote is counted. Be sure that you're following those instructions, because as I said, there were thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of ballots that were thrown out. So I don't know an exact answer to the match, except that I think that if it's in the ballpark, you know, I have a hyphenated last name, actually, is my legal name. It's O'Donnell-Schuster. So if I signed one Sheila Schuster and the other one Sheila O'Donnell Schuster, they would probably catch that and say that doesn't match. So you need to be careful. You know, if the signature has all the names in it and the letters, you're probably fine. I think it was mostly when one had the signature and the other one did not. Next slide, please. So early in-person voting begins on October 13th and ends on November 2nd, as we said before. There will be at least one, what they call a super center voting location, which is what we had in the primary and caused such problems. And that's where you could go to vote no matter what precinct you're voting in. So again, if you think about Jefferson County, which is Louisville, and you think of all of the different House districts, there's probably close to 20 House districts and 4 or 5 Senate districts. So somebody living, in fact, I'm one block off from a different House district. So I would have gone to a different polling location in the old days where we could go in person from a person who lived maybe a block away from me and was in a different House district. They would have gone where their House district was on the ballot. I would have gone to my precinct where my House district was on the ballot. So in the super center voting locations, they had different stations set up for all of those different precincts so that everybody who was voting there had the correct ballot to mark. What we've heard from the Secretary of State primarily, but also from the governor, is that they are requiring there to be more voting locations for both the early in-person and also day of in-person voting. They will be open, the early voting ones will be open from 8 to 4 local time, and they will have them open for 4 hours. We don't know exactly which 4 hours, whether it's 8 to noon or 9 to 1 or something, on the 3 Saturdays in October, which precede the November 3rd election. So October 17th, 24th, and 31st. And you know, a lot of states allow Saturday voting as their primary thing. We've always had a lot of problems in Kentucky with it being on a Tuesday and so forth. So we will try to get those locations out to you if we are given that information in advance. Also, it used to be that if you were voting in person because you weren't going to be available, instead of getting an absentee ballot, you could make an appointment with your county clerk and go in and vote early. You do not need to do that. No appointment is necessary. And you also don't need to sign something about why you are voting early. So again, you don't have that list of reasons that you have for the absentee ballot. You are exercising your constitutional right to vote. You're just doing it before the election day. Next, Marcy. And then finally, we will have voting in person on November 3rd. So again, we're waiting to see how many voting locations, and they may, in a county like Jefferson or Fayette, where there's so many precincts, they may cluster some of those precincts into different voting locations. That certainly is a possibility. There's been a lot of talk on social media and some of the things that I follow where people have said we ought to have different voting times. We ought to extend the voting times later in the evening for people that work and have to travel and so forth. That is not part of what the governor and the Secretary of State agreed to, and that's because it would take legislative action to change those voting times, and that may be something that there may be some momentum for as we get into the next election. You may also remember, and many of the folks on this webinar may have tried to lobby against this. This was Senate Bill either 1 or 2, where the requirement was to have an official ID. It was legislation brought by Secretary of State Michael Adams to issue an official ID. And it was, we weren't sure what the reason was. We were concerned that it was to dampen the number of people or restrict voting. He did testify that there had been no voting fraud. So, you know, I think a lot of Democratic leaders in the House and Senate pushed back saying, why are we putting this additional requirement? The good news is that it has been loosened, at least for this election, because of COVID. So the places where people would have gone to get an official ID issued by the state, other than a driver's license, for instance, will not be a requirement. So if an individual does not have either a driver's license or some official ID, but has, I understand, even being able to bring a bill that they've received from, say, the gas and electric company or the water company showing their name and their address is sufficient to be able to indicate their address. They have to sign something that says why they don't have an official ID, and I think they can put COVID-19 and still should be able to vote. So if you, again, are working with people who have been marginalized, unfortunately, and told that they couldn't vote because they didn't have certain papers, please encourage them to go on. And the other thing is that if a voter's right to vote is challenged at the polls, my understanding is that they can request a provisional ballot and go on and fill out that ballot and then argue with the county officials about why their ballot should be counted in the total. So let's not give up easily that right to vote. Next slide, please, Marcy. Well, let me stop here for just a minute and see if there are any questions at this point or any discussion from anyone in terms of the 3 ways to vote and the importance of registration.
Feel free to add questions in the chat or to unmute yourself briefly, folks.
Well, I must have been crystal clear. So
I think you were, and that's always helpful. That provisional ballot, though, I'm glad you mentioned that provisional thing. It's something that I'd learned about this last session and I didn't know about, so I'm glad it's out there.
Yeah, I think that people really need to know. And again, some of our folks on this call or some of the organizations that we're working with would be doing some outreach to some communities that have maybe only voting for the first time. And we want to be sure that they know that they have a right to speak up and say that I want to request a provisional ballot and I want to fill it out and I want to find out how I make sure that it gets counted.
Yep.
So, yes, Senate Bill 2. Thank you, Angela. I was thinking it was, 1 was the Sanctuary Cities bill that did not pass. Thank you. I knew it was either 1 or 2. It was a top priority of the Senate Republicans. So hard to convey to you all who all are on these ballots. So you think about 65 House races and 12 Senate races. So what I did was to prepare a grid that's on the Advocacy Action Network website. And it's 20 some odd pages long because I literally listed every one of our 120 counties. And then I listed the legislators in that county and whether they had a race or not. If they have a race, then I listed who their opponents are. So you can go to that. If you live in a rural county where you might only have one Senate district and one House district, it'll be very easy for you to see whether your legislator in the House or the Senate is going to be on the ballot with a contested race. If you live in a populated county, again, like Fayette or Jefferson, you're going to have to know what House district or Senate district you're in. So the way to do that is to go to the relatively new LRC website. It used to be lrc.ky.gov. It's now legislature.ky.gov. And the next part is find your legislator. If you're not sure or you don't remember that long thing to type in, if you go to legislature.ky.gov and click under legislators and scroll down, find your legislator will be in there. And a map of Kentucky will pop up. If you move your cursor to your county, and again, you only have one senator and one House member, they will pop up. You can click there and their webpage on the LRC webpage will pop up. If you're in a populated county, again, like Fayette or Jefferson or Warren, or you want to type in your home address, remember that your registration is with your home address, not a work address, and it will pop up. And then you can find that legislator on our election grid and see whether your House member or Senate member has an opponent or not. I listed in the columns whether it was a Democrat or a Republican, but we have an increasing number. I think there are 12 or 14 races scattered across House and Senate districts that have a Libertarian challenger and a couple who are listed as independent. So some of our legislators actually are facing not just one challenger, but perhaps two, maybe even three challengers. There also are write-in candidates. I know that Senator Reggie Thomas, for instance, in Lexington, Fayette County, has a write-in candidate. And apparently write-in candidates can register with the Secretary of State. It's not clear to me, and I didn't know who to ask, whether they will be listed on the ballot as a write-in or whether people need to know to write them in. So I just don't know the answer to that question.
When it's happened before here in Lexington, it has not been listed, but was accepted as a write-in candidate if we wrote them in.
Okay. Well, that would make more sense to me. Otherwise, you know, it's kind of a buy for that person to not be in a party and be registered. But yeah. At any rate, I hope that listing is useful to you. And again, feel free to share that. It's up there for your use. You can send it out. It took a lot of effort on my part, but I'm more than happy for you to share it with your membership and so forth. So let's go to the next slide then, Marcy. So I think we need to do our homework, and I don't want to, there's lots of different ways to find out about your candidates. So one of the things you can do, obviously, is to once you know their name, if they're a House or Senate member, you can obviously go to their LRC webpage and get some idea about their background, because the LRC webpage will note their relative age, date of birth sometimes, what their profession is, what their education is, very often lists their religious affiliation, will list their civic organizations, and will list what committees they serve on. So you can learn a lot just from that. I always warn people to take the pictures that are on the LRC webpage with a kind of a grain of salt. Many of them were done when the legislator first came to the General Assembly and have not been updated. So if your legislator has been there 20 years or 30 years or something, you might add a little aging and gray hair or less hair or whatever to those pictures. You can also obviously look in your newspapers, radio, online, can also get information from the political party that the candidate is affiliated with. And you can Google the candidate's name and get to their website. Many of them have websites that will tell you their background. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters. It's open not only to women, but to men. It's probably one of our oldest nonpartisan organizations, and they will publish information about candidates. And in some situations, in some of the League of Women Voters offices, they will host candidate forums. I think it's increasingly difficult to do that in this age of COVID, but you might look for that. KFTC, the Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, is, as you all know, probably one of our largest grassroots social, economic, and environmental justice organizations. And they will typically send out pre-election questionnaires on a wide range of issues, from environment to social justice to criminal justice to education and human rights and so forth, and then publish their responses. KET will undoubtedly have some interviews, some debates, so to speak, for the federal offices for sure. I'm sure that the congressional races and probably not for all of these statewide offices, because they would be accused of handpicking out of all of these many races that we have.
At the southwest corner of Glensboro Road and bypass.
Next slide, please, Marcy. So if you want to be best friends with a challenger or with a legislator who has a race, volunteer with them. It is really not too late, even in this election cycle, to get active. If you've got a candidate, and again, whether an incumbent or a challenger, contact them. Host a virtual neighborhood gathering to help them get their name and face and platform out there. Volunteer to distribute yard signs. You can do that even in this time of COVID and stay socially distant. You can volunteer to send postcards. There's a lot of that going on because of COVID has made it so difficult for campaigns. And sometimes you use your own money for the stamps, and other times they are provided to you. But that's an excellent way to send postcards out, and they will usually give you a list of people in the district. We also are seeing a lot of calls for volunteers to help distribute materials. So instead of knocking on the door and trying to get a face-to-face at the door, they're asking for people to sign up to walk up to the doorknob and hang some educational material about the candidate. Contribute to a PAC, a political action committee, or to the candidates of your choice. And I know a lot of people are opposed to that. They want to get the money out of politics. But until we can get money out of politics, I am telling you that campaigns are extremely expensive. So just doing a round of postcards, or doing a round of yard signs, or bumper stickers, or any of that. Most of the state candidates are not able to purchase airtime, certainly not TV time, maybe not even radio time. So if your organization, for instance, some of the nursing organizations, some of the, the psychological associations, some of the groups have a PAC, contribute that way, or write a check to the candidate of your choice. Volunteer with the political party of your choice. And they're really, really beating the bushes to try to get poll workers. So if your health is not at risk with COVID-19, and as they point out, most of the poll workers historically have been folks that would fall in that over 60 at risk with COVID. So if you're younger than that and feel healthy, sign up to be a poll worker. Above all, let's make sure that we vote. We know that elections have consequences. You might remember in 2018 that several of those Kentucky House seats were decided by fewer than a dozen votes. In fact, one was decided by one vote and then ended up in a tie, and they had to, they were going to flip a coin, and then one of the challengers dropped out rather than to have it decided by a coin toss. But somebody pointed out that, and I remember this now, that Governor Bevin won his primary by 83 votes. So think about that. Less than one vote per county would have changed that and given the race to Jamie Comer. So 83 votes out of, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of votes that were cast. And my favorite quote, this is a guy at the University of Virginia, Larry Sabato, who always says, every election is determined by the people who show up. So I encourage you to be one of those people that show up. Next slide, please, Marcy. So I want to do a little bit on what we're looking at going into the 2021 General Assembly session. And I thought it was helpful to just remind you, many of you are very aware of this, but this is a short session, and we've been having short sessions since 2001. And I will tell you, as a lobbyist advocate, short sessions are tough. Even in the best of circumstances, they are tough. It's a time when you cannot make a misstep. If you miss a committee meeting that you needed to have your bill heard and get out early, you've lost a whole week, and there are not that many weeks in a 30-day session. So just remember that the time is of the essence. They cannot go, by Constitution, they cannot go more than 30 days. So they will go in on January 5th. They will work until January 8th, and then they go home for 3 weeks. It's always, I always say they work so hard those first 4 days that they have to go home and rest for 3 weeks. And they come back the first week of February and then work pretty much through to the middle or end of March with some holidays in there and so forth. That period when they're back home is a fabulous time to do advocacy. You know at that point what committees every legislator's been assigned to. You know who your committee chairs are. You know who your leadership in the House and the Senate for the Democrats and the Republicans are. You can really focus, and you've got legislators at home. So particularly in terms of getting in touch with brand new legislators, that's a great time to do it. Second point is that this is the first time in the history of Kentucky that we will have a budget bill to do in a short session. You may remember that in last session, the 2020 session, they decided, and I think wisely decided, to pass just a one-year budget bill. So they've got to come back, and one of the things that will be an absolute priority will be a budget bill for the second fiscal year in the biennium. You will need to remember that there's a critical shortage of money due to COVID-19. And so I think our primary job as mental health folks is to protect our CMHCs and other quasi-governmental agencies and to try to stave off just devastating cuts in our programs. I think that the session is likely to be conducted again with restricted in-person contact. Even restrictions with media and lobbyists being there. For those of you who are up in Frankfurt on a regular basis, wearing whatever hat you wear, that period from about March 12th, when they closed the doors, to the time when they finally adjourned a little bit early and without using all 60 days, was just extremely odd. You found it very difficult to be in touch with legislators. You couldn't catch them in the hallway. You couldn't see them in the cafeteria. You couldn't pick up the intel that floats around in Frankfurt. And I've heard from several legislators that their cell phones were blowing up during that time. Everybody that had a cell phone number for them was trying like crazy to text or call them and so forth. So very, very difficult. As you probably, if you're following any of the legislative meetings online with KET or on the LRC Facebook page, there's a tremendous amount of friction between the governor and executive branch and the Republicans in the legislature, particularly the Senate Republicans, and it's getting worse. So at a time when we really need to pull together for a budget and for making those critical decisions. I think it's open warfare. There will be at least 17 brand new legislators, and that's based on the number of open seats and the number of sitting legislators who lost their primary election. So if every contested seat, remember 65 in the House and 12 in the Senate, if the incumbent were reelected and every one of those seats, we would still have 17 brand new legislators in Frankfurt on January 5th. So our work is cut out for us. That's why it's so important to get to know them during this campaign period before the election. Next slide, please, Marcy.
We've got about 10 minutes left, just so you know.
Okay, thank you. So I went through and I've got about 6 things that I am pretty sure will be on the docket for, 1-year budget. We talked about that. The revenue projections for that next fiscal year are just bottoming out. You don't have businesses operating, so you don't have businesses paying taxes. And you have increased costs borne by state and local governments. So particularly if Congress fails to pass a relief measure that has funding for state and local governments, and the one that's being talked about by Senator McConnell and the Senate Republicans in DC does not have any funding for state and local governments. So if there is no more funding, the budget is going to be just impossible, I think, without deep cuts, which is just scary. You all are very familiar with the pension issue for the CMHCs and other quasi-governmental agencies. And remember, these include the domestic violence shelters, the rape crisis centers, the children's advocacy centers, as well as our community mental health centers, includes the public health departments, and also includes the regional universities. So we have fought for them to maintain their sustainability because of their employer contribution cost. It was frozen yet again at 49.47% in this last budget. Just to explain very quickly, that means that for every employee that one of those agencies has, they're paying 100% of the employee salary and benefits. They're paying 50% of that back into the pension system. So they're paying for another half person that they don't have on the workforce. It was supposed to go up to 83%, and we fought that off and kept it at 49.47. I think the ask in this budget session is going to be just freeze it again. This is not a time we don't have the opportunity to really work out a long-range solution. And we absolutely have to assure the sustainability of these safety net services. We know that communities are hurting. We know that people are hurting. We know that mental health is at a crisis with COVID and with the racial injustice kinds of issues. And we need to be sure that these community agencies are sustainable. Next, Marcy. So there's a lot of talk about the importance of telehealth, and some of you are working with agencies or in your own profession. And during the state of emergency, both the federal government and our state Department for Medicaid and State Department of Insurance have lifted restrictions to make telehealth more accessible and available. There's been a lot of talk and a lot of work has already gone on in terms of what those changes are and how many of those could the legislature take action on? How many could our state Medicaid office take action on to keep in place? There's no doubt that telehealth has grown in not just popularity, but in usage. It also has pointed out the horrible connectivity problems that we have across the Commonwealth. But we need to be sure that as many of these restrictions are permanently removed so that we can keep that accessibility. I think people where transportation is an issue, people in more rural areas, people that need specialized services and don't have them in their community have really worked hard with the telehealth. It's not the end all and be all. There certainly are populations of folks that we would like to provide services to, young children, for instance, people who are on the autism spectrum disorder continuum, some of the older clients who just don't do technology and are not used to that. I mean, there are certainly people that need to be seen in person, but telehealth is a extremely useful technology, and we need to keep it in place. Next, please, Marcy. So this is this is a battle I've been fighting for, well, since 2000 for sure. And we did a massive mental health substance use disorder parity bill in 2000, and back when we were the little engine that could, when people said that there was no way we could pass it. And then in 2006, it was put into federal law, and with the Affordable Care Act, parity. Parity means that you cannot require co-pays or co-insurance or deductibles at a different level for behavioral health than you have for physical health. It means that you cannot have restrictions on the number of days in the hospital or the number of therapy sessions for behavioral health if you don't have it for physical health. So the parity is within the plan that's being offered, and it's a comparison between behavioral health and physical health. The Kentucky Psychiatric Medical Association is following the lead of the American Psychiatric Association in making parity #1 priority. And I've been involved with Miranda Sloan, who is their executive director. Representative Kim Moser is very interested in this. We've had some meetings with Department of Insurance. And what this legislation would do is to require insurers to actually put in writing how they are assuring that the parity requirement is being met, not just a sign off on a form with DOI, but to actually spell out and give examples of how they are meeting parity. So we're excited about this piece of legislation. It's not been filed yet, but we've had discussions even with Representative Bart Rowland, who is chair of Banking and Insurance in the House. And as I say, with DOI, and they are very supportive, so I'm excited about it. The banned conversion therapy is a bill that's been around for several sessions. It's now really being called the Youth Mental Health Protection Act, would require the licensure boards to discipline practitioners who are doing it. Also does two other things. One is it forbids the use of public funds to go to any agency who provides what is called conversion therapy, which Senator Alice Forgy Kerr calls conversion torture, and that's really caught on. It also has an education requirement in it to educate the public that conversion therapy is harmful to children and youth. There's a national organization called the Trevor Project, and their survey showed that 42% of the LGBT youth who underwent conversion therapy attempted or were successful with suicide. 42%. So this is, something that really needs to happen. This bill has never had a hearing until last week, and I'm proud to be a part of that. Senator Alice Forgy Kerr, as you all know, is a Republican. For her to be a primary sponsor of the bill in the Senate, which was Senate Bill 85, and she got a hearing in front of the Interim Licensing and Occupations Committee, and it went very well. She had a Baptist minister who has been a minister for 51 years who gave outstanding testimony about the importance of this legislation. So from that conservative religious background was great. And then a young man who was so brave named Zach Miners came and testified about his 4 years undergoing conversion therapy, for which he has been in really good mental health treatment for 10 years to try to restore his sense of well-being and functioning. So we are more optimistic Representative Kim Banta, who is a Republican in the House, is going to be a primary co-sponsor with Representative Lisa Wilner, the only licensed mental health professional in the legislature. So the House version, I think, will be again House Bill 99. So we're excited about the chances. And then one more slide, I think, with Marcy. Yeah. So there will be legislation around suicide prevention that will use the ability of law enforcement to bring a request to the courts to take away the firearms of someone who is at risk of harming themselves or others. And it's not quite as complicated as what they call the extreme risk protection orders, but might be a halfway measure that won't get maybe the gun owners so bent out of shape as they were last session when they all showed up with their guns and masks and so forth when they had the rumor that there was going to be a red flag law. So we'll need to get more information about that. And the final thing I put on was that I just think in the aftermath of all the ongoing protests and racial injustice, we really need to be more active in criminal justice reform. We know that Representative Attica Scott and Lisa Wilner are filing a Breonna Taylor law that would be no-knock warrants would be removed. But we also need to look at all aspects of criminal justice that create racial disparities. So cash requirement for bail, the difficulty in expunging criminal records, the difficulty in amending the Constitution to give felons their right to vote. So I just think that so much of this is so tied to mental health, not only for communities of color, but for the rest of us who have a connection with those communities or just feel for the kinds of centuries of discrimination. Last slide, I think, Marcy, you're almost just a reminder that you're an advocate because you vote and you speak out, and you can influence others to vote and to speak out. And the next. So stay informed and connected. As you know, we'll post things on our website. If you're not a member of the Mental Health Coalition, please contact Marcy or me or put something in the chat. We want to get everybody on there. Remember to be persistent, not negative, but persistent. All politics are local, so any opportunity to get connected with your House member, your Senate member. Remember to say thank you, reach out and educate others, and believe that your voice can really make a difference. And then my final, I always end with the wonderful words of Margaret Mead. And I think the group on this webinar are that small group of thoughtful people that can change the world. So I hope this information has been helpful to you. Are there any questions in the chat that we should wrap up with, Marcy?
No, thank you so much, though, everyone. And it was good discussion in the chat about some things that were going on, but they were mostly political in nature. And since we're a 501c3, I'm not going to go there. So we are glad to see more women and people of color running, though. That was coming up for sure. So
yes.
That was a good
one. Absolutely.
Definitely. And I'm always glad to have people, leaving this legislature who may not be friendly to mental health. So it's always good to see those folks go.
Well, and thank you all so much for being on. We will send out the slide deck. And again, remember that county by county listing is available to you. So it's really up to you all to spread the word. Think about your outreach. Think about your folks that you may assume are registered and maybe aren't, because we've got some time. We've got all of September to whip that up and get people registered and get them into the voting mentality. One final thought I will leave you with is that legislators pay more attention to their constituents who are voters than to their constituents who are not voters. And I have heard that over and over again from them. So just a reminder that they can check to see whether you're registered and whether you're a frequent voter or not. They're not in the voting booth with you, so they can't tell how you have voted, but they do know whether you're registered and whether you're a consistent voter. So you are higher up on their list of esteemed constituents if you are a voter. So let's get out the vote, and thank you all so much. Let's push mental health wherever we can. Thank you again, Marcy, for hosting this and for Mental Health America putting on the webinar.
Dr. Wilkins added, Dr. Sheila Schuster is the smartest person I know about advocacy. I appreciate that, and I appreciate your lending your expertise today. Thank you all. If you have questions later, feel free to reach us. Yep. Thanks so much,
Yes.
everybody.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.